Have you ever wondered why the name Moab or Moabite rings a bell when you're reading the Bible? They pop up everywhere from Genesis all the way to the prophets, sometimes as enemies, sometimes as neighbors, and even as part of Jesus' family tree. So, who exactly were the Moabites, and what can their story teach us today? The origin of the Moabites is a rather uncomfortable story, found in Genesis chapter 19. It begins after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot and his 2 daughters, having escaped the city, were living in a cave. Believing they were the last people on earth, his daughters made a desperate and misguided decision. They got their father drunk and lay with him to preserve their family line. The elder daughter gave birth to a son named Moab, and he became the ancestor of the Moabites. The younger daughter also had a son, Ben-Ami, who became the ancestor of the Ammonites. This difficult beginning set a tone of conflict and separation from their relatives, the Israelites, who were descendants of Lot's uncle Abraham. So, who were these people? The Moabites settled in a fertile plateau east of the Dead Sea, in what is modern-day Jordan. This strategic location placed them right along a major ancient trade route, the King's Highway. They were a Semitic people, closely related to the Israelites in language and culture. They weren't just a wandering tribe. They built fortified cities, had a monarchy, and worshipped their own set of gods. Their chief deity was Chemosh, god to whom they sometimes offered human sacrifices in times of great distress, a practice a world away from the worship of Yahweh. Their relationship with Israel was a roller coaster of conflict and occasional peace. When the Israelites were making their way to the Promised Land after the Exodus from Egypt, they asked for permission to pass through Moabite territory. The king of Moab refused. This wasn't just an act of inhospitality, it was a deep-seated fear. Seeing the massive number of Israelites, the Moabite king Balak panicked. This leads us to the strange and famous story of Balak and Balaam in the book of Numbers. Terrified of Israel's power, Balak hired a well-known diviner named Balaam to place a curse on the Israelites. But here's the twist. Every time Balaam opened his mouth to curse them, a blessing came out instead. God literally turned his curses into blessings, declaring, "How can I curse whom God has not cursed?" This event showed that God's protection over his people was stronger than any human or spiritual opposition. However, Balaam later gave Balak some sinister advice. Use Moabite women to seduce the Israelite men into idolatry and immorality. This strategy worked, leading to a plague that killed thousands of Israelites and created lasting animosity. The conflict didn't end there. During the period of the Judges, the Moabites, under their king Eglon, oppressed Israel for 18 years. The Bible describes Eglon as a very fat man, and the Israelites cried out to God for deliverance. God raised up a judge named Ehud, a left-handed man from the tribe of Benjamin. In a dramatic story of espionage and assassination, Ehud tricked and killed King Eglon, leading an army that liberated Israel from Moabite rule. These stories paint the Moabites as persistent adversaries of Israel. But the story of the Moabites isn't all about war and conflict. There's a beautiful story of redemption and grace that shines brightly from this nation, the story of Ruth. Ruth was a Moabitess who married an Israelite man who had moved to Moab with his family to escape a famine. Tragically, her husband, her brother-in-law, and her father-in-law all died, leaving her with her mother-in-law, Naomi. When Naomi decided to return to her homeland of Judah, she urged her Moabite daughters-in-law to stay in their own country. One did, but Ruth famously clung to Naomi, saying, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God." Ruth's loyalty and love were extraordinary. She completely left her home, her people, and her gods to follow Naomi and embrace the God of Israel. Back in Bethlehem, she worked hard, gleaning in the fields to provide for herself and Naomi. It was there she met Boaz, a relative of Naomi's late husband. Boaz was a righteous man who was impressed by Ruth's character and faithfulness. He acted as her kinsman redeemer, marrying her to preserve her deceased husband's family line. This act of kindness and obedience to God's law brought about a beautiful outcome. Ruth, the Moabitess, became the great-grandmother of King David, placing her directly in the lineage of Jesus Christ. The story of Ruth shows us the incredible breadth of God's grace. Despite the law in Deuteronomy, which stated that no Moabite could enter the assembly of the Lord, God made an exception for a woman with a faithful heart. Ruth's story is a testament that God's grace is not limited by nationality, background, or past mistakes. He looks at the heart. Her inclusion in Jesus' genealogy is a beautiful preview of the gospel message that salvation is for all people, from every tribe and nation who turn to him in faith. The story of the Moabites is a story of conflict, yes, but it's also a powerful story of God's sovereignty and his amazing, all-inclusive grace. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the history of the Moabites. If you found this exploration of biblical history insightful, make sure to hit that subscribe button for the Bible stories and insights. We have many more stories and lessons from the Bible to share with you.